Welcome to my presentation titled Transitional Spaces, Living Patterns and Neighbourhoods. My name is Deepthi Perera. I'm from the Faculty of Built Environment, University of New South Wales, Australia. I like to start with a quote by Jane Jacobs on Eyes on the Street. First, there must be a clear demarcation between what is public space and what is private space. Second, there must be eyes upon the street, eyes belonging to those who we might call the natural proprietors of the street. The buildings on a street, equipped to handle strangers and to ensure the safety of both residents and strangers, must be oriented to the street. They cannot turn their backs or blank sides on it and leave it blind. Jane Jacobs, The Death or Life of Great American Cities, 1961. Although Jacobs' writings were largely on urban safety, calling for streets to be lively places, the arguments she brought up were extended to look into the complexity in cities, including neighborhoods. Emily Talon identifies neighborhoods as the spatial unit that people relate to. As per Emily Talon, residential neighborhoods today lack what it had before, such as a sense of place, local rootedness, social connection, and a sense that everyday world around them mattered because it was a setting for daily life and that residents had the ability to effectuate change or play a role in neighborhood life. Past research highlights the importance of the connection between neighborhood and the in-between space of house, meaning neighborhood and house design. Housing must be considered in relation to streets, open spaces, and neighborhoods, says Amos Rappaport in his book Theory, Culture and Housing, 2000. If so, can the design of the house contribute towards neighborhood social interactions? Transitional spaces that are on the periphery of the Indo-built form of the house are multifaceted and have functional, climatic, and socio-cultural importance. Their impact is not only on the house and its inhabitants, but also on a wider spectrum of surroundings, neighborhoods, and cities as a whole. These spaces, which define and contribute towards the open spaces in a city, are controlled by planners through planning and building regulations. At the same time, it is the role of the architects to incorporate it into the design of the building and indoor space in an appropriate manner. Historically and traditionally, outdoor and semi-outdoor transitional spaces like verandas, patios, terraces, front yards, backyards and courtyards were an integral part of the house in tropical and subtropical regions and acted as buffer zones climatically as well as socially. They were habitable spaces which contributed to the living style and social interactions within house as well as outside the house. Contemporary urban residential neighborhoods in Sri Lanka are faced with many challenges affecting outdoor and semi-outdoor transitional spaces, thus the contemporary house designs. Some of them are small plot sizes, which results in high density, rising temperature due to lack of open and green spaces, and disease-carrying insects like mosquitoes. In Sri Lanka, current building regulations for a single detached house allow plot size as low as 150 square meters, minimum site frontage of 6 meters, setback from street minimum 1 meter with a 1 meter projection and a solid boundary wall allowed along the street. No setbacks from side boundaries, rear space minimum 2.3 meters up to 2 floors, plot coverage of 65%, and floor area ratio of 1 to 2 if the road width is 6 meters. Today, outdoor and semi-outdoor transitional spaces in most contemporary houses have changed to no front garden space and solid boundary wall along the street, rear space and internal courtyards used to get natural light and ventilation, blank walls on sides making detached houses attached, balconies on upper floors, roof terraces and roof gardens, and verandas onto the rear space. However, since majority of the houses are privately designed and developed, the interpretation of this change from house to house and will have an effect on the spatial structure of a house as well as overall neighborhood patterns. Transitional spaces are also reintroduced in contemporary houses today as a vital tool in climate-responsive passive design around the world. However, providing spaces does not always mean that they are used as expected. The residents sometimes modify them, abandon them, or convert them into other spaces. And the purpose of its introduction to the house will be lost. Does this mean that a specific type of a transitional space will have a specific role? Would it be functional, climatic, social, or a combination of the above? Will there be a connection between the spatial character of a transitional space and its use? A pilot study was carried out to investigate the socio-spatial role of outdoor and semi-outdoor spaces of single detached middle-income houses over the years using space syntax methods and interviews. Space syntax will enable the plan forms to be represented in a graphical way and compare different plan forms using the same parameters. 11 houses were selected to cover 3 different periods: pre-independence, before 1948, post-independence, between 1948 and 1990, and contemporary from 1990 to present. Visiting and interviews were carried out on 2 houses from the selected sample, 1 post-independence and 1 contemporary. Interview and observation findings were included in the analysis when discussing the social dimension in relation to use of space and interactions with neighborhood. Neighborhood analysis was done on one street from one selected neighborhood to evaluate the impacts on neighborhood open spaces and possible neighborhood interactions. Definition of space syntax. In space syntax, buildings can be represented as convex maps, least set of spaces that covers the system, and adjacent accesses as links or permeability pathways. Justified graph or J-graph. A justified graph is one in which a node is drawn at the base and all points of depth 1 from that point are aligned horizontally immediately above it. All points at depth 2 from that point above those at depth 1, and so on until all levels of depth from that point are accounted for. Using this method, a building layout can be converted into a graph in which each node indicates a room and the links between them indicate doorways, which are called pathways of permeability. Hillier and Hansen, The Social Logic of Space, 1984. Using space syntax theory, which proposes that the behavior, norms, and values of a specific sociocultural group may be related to the spatial order, spatial relationship, spatial boundaries, and movement patterns of a house form, the pilot study explored the typological evolution of outdoor and semi-outdoor transitional spaces of single detached urban middle-class houses in Colombo, Sri Lanka. Transitional space types were coded as per their location, such as outdoor, semi-outdoor, internal, external, facing street, facing another plot, ground floor, first floor, second floor and above, and roof terraces. 18 different types were identified covering all three major periods. Selection of samples for the pilot study. Samples were selected from the three periods: pre-independence, coded as pre-I, post-independence as post-I, and contemporary as cont houses. Samples from each period covered different and most popular house types present in each period. J-graphs were generated for each house based on plan forms for analysis. House plans and drawings taken mainly from published resources, except Post ID and Cont B, which were visited and interviewed, and they were obtained from owners. Neighbourhood selected was the oldest planned housing scheme in Sri Lanka, with type plan houses built for the government officials in 1950s. Outdoor and semi-outdoor transitional spaces were studied under the following: movement patterns, spatial connections, house-to-neighborhood interface. Based on space syntax theories, spaces were analyzed as per their topological nature. A spaces are the ones with a single link and by definition dead-end spaces, and they are occupation-only spaces. B spaces are with more than one link but cannot themselves be dead-end spaces, but must be on the way to and back from at least one dead-end space. C spaces lie on a single ring. C-type spaces raise the possibility of through movement while also constraining it to specific sequence of spaces. D spaces lie on more than one ring. D-type permits movement but with much less built-in control and more connectivity. Pre-I houses. The houses had more D spaces, making more people move through them. Post-I houses. More C spaces were visible, still making people pass through them. They also had a small number of A spaces. Cont houses. Increase of A spaces, which are dead-end and people don't pass through. Pilot study analysis of houses and neighborhood. Number of connections for each space in houses. Pre-I, most spaces had 2 to 3 connections or 4 to 5 connections. Post-I, majority had 2 to 3 connections, few 4 to 5, and some with one connection. Quant houses, majority had 2 to 3, and increase in spaces with one connection. Connectivity has decreased in contemporary houses. Combining with interview findings, study attempted to draw connections between spatial role and use of space. Since using outdoor and semi-outdoor spaces will create opportunities for more casual interactions with neighborhoods. Neighborhood Street was studied comparing original scheme with type plans to what it has become now. Open spaces and semi-outdoor spaces on each level were mapped. A snapshot observation along the street mapped the house-to-street interface in terms of use of space, types of activities, and interactions. Some initial findings on houses are: 1. Contemporary houses have somewhat distanced itself from the neighborhoods and streets while addressing the site restrictions. 2. Social role of the transitional spaces were taken over by functional requirements. This started in post-independence period and became more in contemporary houses. 3. More spaces of contemporary houses create less opportunities for use compared to previous periods, and it is confirmed through the interview. These are mainly dead-end spaces. Number 4. Lack of use make them redundant spaces. Number 5. The space with highest connectivity is the most used space, which is the service court in Cont B house, and it is also a space which is on a ring, which makes people move through it. Initial findings on neighborhoods. 1. The building footprint increased by 2.64 times the original one, thus reducing the open space. 2. Introduction of 5 new sub-neighborhoods due to subdivision of plots. This has created another street pattern with smaller neighborhoods within the main one. 3. Subdivisions created blank facade to the original street on one plot. 4. Front garden space is regularly used space. However, interaction with the street is limited now due to less people walking on the street. 5. 83% of the houses have partial visibility to street and visibility from street on the ground level. 6. Casual physical interactions with people walking on the street happens when transitional spaces along the street are used by residents. 7. However, this particular street is the only street in this neighborhood where much of its 1950s houses are still remaining, at least on the street front. Therefore, it does not represent a typical neighborhood with contemporary houses. Outcomes. A relationship between the type of space and use of space is visible. Spaces with high connectivity and generating movement, C and D types, are mostly used spaces. Spaces with low connectivity and dead end, occupation only, A spaces have less use. Some of these are redundant spaces. Most balconies fall into this category unless they lie on a ring. When usable outdoor and semi-outdoor spaces are given, people use them and create opportunities for neighborhood interaction. When usable spaces are there, neighborhood interactions happen not only with the street but with neighboring houses on sites. Roof terrace, although a C space, is used only on special occasions due to its location away from the other main spaces of the house. Since the interviews were carried out only on 2 houses, these outcomes need to be verified with more interviews on different types of transitional spaces. This is ongoing research and therefore the findings of pilot study are inconclusive. This research is fully funded by the Australian Government's Research Training Program, RTP. Thank you.